Hi everyone, it's Jackie with Stitchhouse. I'm back again with another Fun Fact Friday. Today we're going to talk about needles. Let me get my mask off so you can hear me a little bit better. And the main thing I want to tell you about needles is change them often. You cannot expect a needle to last you for weeks or months at a time. Do you know that most machine manufacturers say 4 to 6 hours of machine time and it's time to change the needle? All right, so if you're having trouble with the quality of your stitch, maybe it just doesn't look good tension-wise, maybe you're having something more severe like skipping of stitches, change your needle. That's all you need to know about needles. Thanks for coming today. Well, no, there's more. Let me tell you some more, okay? We talked about this when we talked about thread. You remember my large needle. Do you know I actually have 2 of them? This is my original one, and gosh, it's probably close to 35 years old. I bought it from Bernina of America, and it was prior to the time that needles had what's called a scarf on the back of the needle. So this is the front of the needle, and this is the back of the needle, and the back at the top has a flat surface, and this original needle did not have a little cutout that this needle has. Now you'll never be using a needle this large, but I certainly, like to demonstrate with these needles. So there's the scarf. Can you see how that comes down here and then dents in a little bit? That was designed into needles probably by Smets when knits became popular and readily available to home sewers in the 60s and 70s. And so it prevents a lot of skipping of stitches because it allows the hook to come in closer to the loop that forms and closer to the needle and catch that loop that forms on the back side of the needle. And when we talked about thread, we talked about you want the thread to be able to move freely through the eye of the needle. The thread also has to rest in the groove on the front of the needle. And again, you won't be using a needle this large or this size thread, but I want you to see that this thread, let's say, does not fit all the way into the groove of the needle. So because the thread is not protected by the groove of the needle, a stitch formation will not happen properly. That is, the thread will be in a bind here. The fabric will cause the thread to be in a bind, and as the needle comes up out of the fabric, a stitch will not happen because a loop does not form on the back of the thread. So that's why I like to put a lot of emphasis on the groove on the front of the needle, because it's not just a matter of the thread going through the eye of the needle, but the thread has to fit in the groove of the needle as well. So that's something I'd like for you to remember about needles. The needle system that we use now is 130-705H. It's a standard needle system for all home sewing machines. Unless your machine is a little bit older, say 40 or 50 years old. 130-705H, when you see that on the package of needles, you can be assured that that will fit your needle. The H at the end stands for a German word, which I didn't even put on a piece of paper because I knew I wasn't going to try to say it, but it's a German word that means with sleeve. So the H means with sleeve. So all needles now have that sleeve on the back side. Then you'll also find the size of the needle indicated, and you will see 2 numbers, perhaps 90 and then slash and 14. 90 indicates a European sizing, and it's actually a percentage of a millimeter. So a 90 is 9/10 of a millimeter, and that measurement is taken above the eye of the needle, just about right here, okay? And a 110 needle, which is a much larger needle, would be 1.1 millimeters. And if you don't like to hear about millimeters, ignore all that information and just go with the size 14. 14 is our American sizing, the numbers that we use here in the United States. And we know that that's a fairly sizable needle when we see it's a 90-14. You want to be sure that you gear the size of your needle, not just to your thread, but to your fabric. So if you're sewing on lightweight fabrics, you want a smaller, finer needle, like a size 70, which would be an 11 or 12 in American sizing, or an 80, which is a little more substantial but not too large. If you're sewing on, say, quilt weight fabrics, I do have a lot of customers who like to use a 70, but generally an 80 or a 90 is used by most quilters. If you're sewing on heavy fabric like denim and it's dense and you have lots of layers to go through, then let's get on up and get you at least a 90, probably a 100, maybe even a size 110 needle. So gear the size of your needle to the fabric that you're sewing. Used to be we had one needle, different sizes, but one type of needle. It was a sharp needle. And then when knits were introduced and became available to home sewers, a ballpoint needle was introduced. Right now, our most popular needle is a universal needle. And it's not a true sharp needle, and it's not a true ballpoint needle. So the point on a universal needle is the first degree of a ballpoint needle. And it's a needle that works well on a wide variety of fabrics. It's certainly a needle that you would want to have in your supply of needles, although there may be times when you prefer to use and will get better results from other needles. But a good all-purpose needle is a universal, available in several sizes. 70, 80, and 90 are the most popular and ones you would probably want to have on hand. Again, it's a 705H. Oh, here's two other letters that you're going to see on needle packages a lot now. CF, that means it has a chrome finish on it. Very simple, chrome finish. Be sure and memorize that. All right, stretch needles are also available now. Now this has a greater degree of a ball point on it. You can see if you look at this little illustration that the tip is actually more rounded. And that is so that when the needle goes down through knit fabric, it will not penetrate the fiber. It will push the fiber to the side and not damage and leave holes in the knit fabric. This stretch needle is the greatest degree of ballpoint needle that's available, and if you sew on knits, especially lycra and spandex type fabrics, you definitely would want to be using a stretch needle, the greatest degree of a ballpoint needle. Again, you'd gear to the size, to the weight of your fabric. Another ballpoint needle is called a jersey needle. Now this one is not quite as round on the tip as the stretch needle, but it is more rounded, more of a ballpoint than the universal needle. You could use this on t-shirt knits, not sweater knits, but sweatshirt knits. This would be a good needle for that type of fabric. Okay, and then the needle list goes on. Those of you who do embroidery on your home sewing machines, there are embroidery needles, and they are highly recommended. Look at the eye of this needle in comparison to the eye of even this needle. Can you tell from this picture how much wider it is? And that's so there'll be less friction on the thread as it goes in and out of your embroidery design thousands of times. So you'll have less thread breakage with an embroidery needle. Highly recommend an embroidery needle for embroidery. And then the next needle that I want to show you and talk about is called a metafill or a metallic needle. And for those of you who insist on using the old rayon threads and metallic threads other than King Star, you want to have this needle and use it because those are threads that break easily. Now, if you use the King Star thread, metallic thread that we have here at Stitchhouse, you will not need this special needle. You can use a regular embroidery needle with a King Star. But for problem threads, the metallic or Metafill needle is an excellent one to use. Another needle that you might want to have on hand, and this is a true sharp needle. This is called the jeans, or maybe called a denim needle. And it has not only a sharp point, but it has a very tapered sharp point, so that there is less needle deflection as the needle approaches entering the denim fabric. So you've got a heavy, dense fabric like denim, and this is the ideal needle to use there, because you definitely will be able to cut down on needle breakage with the design of this point. A quilting needle. Now I have to confess here, for years I've thought that a quilting needle is a true sharp needle. And when I was doing research for this little video, I found that that's not true. A quilting needle is actually very much like the point on a universal needle. It has a little bit of a rounded tip on it. I've always known that a quilt needle was designed for quilting, not for piecing, but for quilting, so that when you go down through the first layer of fabric and then the batting and then the second layer of fabric, your backing fabric, this needle is designed to make a nice hole so the thread can go through all of that without interference from all the thick things that you're entering, without causing stitch problems. And the reason for that is the channel, the tunnel on the front of the needle, of the quilting needle, is a little bit deeper. Not wider, but deeper, so it protects the thread more when you are quilting a quilt. Now, I know that a lot of us like to use this quilting needle for piecing, and so I would say stay with it if that's what you're using for piecing. I'm going to skip down and talk about the top stitch and the Microtex needles, and I don't have illustrations of those, but I want to tell you that they are true sharp needles. And I'm moving from quilting to these two needles because there are a lot of quilters who like to do their piecing with either a top stitch or a Microtex needle, because they find that they get the truest straight stitch with those two needles, because they are true sharp needles. And even though this is called a top stitch needle, it comes small enough that you can use it. We have them in 70s and 80s. You can use them for your piecing. Same is true with Microtex. Top stitch needle was designed to accommodate a heavier thread for top stitching, and so that's something that you might consider, like if you're hemming jeans with the jeans thread. By the way, I'm not real fond of jeans thread, but I frequently hem jeans because I'm a little short. And so I use 2 strands of metrazine thread through the eye of a top stitch needle, and the groove and the eye will accommodate those 2 strands, and I can get a heavier look to my top stitching without using that funky jeans thread that I'm not fond of. A Microtex needle was designed to work nicely in microfiber fabrics. So anytime you have a flowy fabric, it's probably made from tiny fibers, lots and lots of tiny fibers. And you need a good sharp needle that will penetrate without damaging that flowy fabric. And then let's come back, and there is a leather needle. I highly recommend a leather needle if you're sewing through leather or vinyl. This is a needle that has a wedge-shaped point on it, and that point is designed to cut a hole into the fabric for each stitch, rather than poking a hole, and that poked hole might come open, might tear open. But the point on a leather needle is designed specifically to keep that from happening on leather and vinyl fabric. So definitely look for this needle, and of course they are available here. Also, there are some real specialty needles that you need to know about. There are double needles. This is a 2.0 double needle, and this one is called a 6.0 double needle. So there's the 2.0 or the 6.0, and here's the 2.0 double needle. So as you can see, they're talking about the space between the two needles. Now, many machines have limiters that you can set on them when you use these needles, depending on which space you have between the needles, so that you cannot move your needle position into a position where the needle would break, or you can't use a decorative stitch set too wide where the needle will break. If you don't have that limiter on your machine, then let me tell you the formula for figuring out how wide you can set your stitch width with a double needle. So if the maximum stitch width on your machine is 9 millimeters and you're using a 6.0 double needle, you subtract the 6 from the 9, and the maximum stitch width that you can use is 3. Now that's not going to be a stitch that does pretty things for decorative stitches, and so if you're using decorative stitches, you might want to use double needles that are set closer together, like this 2 millimeter. If we have a 9 millimeter maximum stitch width with your decorative stitches, then you subtract 2 from 9 and you can set your stitch width as wide as 9 with your decorative stitches. And that can give you a really interesting effect, either with 2 threads of the same color or with contrasting threads. So don't hesitate to play with your decorative stitches with double needles. Just watch that you don't go too wide and watch your needle positions. Again, check your instruction book to see if you can set your machine to help you out so you won't get in trouble with double needles. And then another needle that's interesting to use is called a hem stitch or wing needle, and these needles actually have wings on them. I'm from Oklahoma, and we had a tree called a winged elm tree, and so each branch has little wings, thin wings on it, and that's what these needles have, is little wings on them. They are used on natural fibers generally best because the wing needle is designed to open a hole in the fabric and leave that hole for a decorative effect. So you can use it with a straight stitch, a triple straight stitch, and with some of your decorative stitches as well. The more times this wing needle goes into one hole, the more effective this needle is. Don't try it with polyester or nylon fabric because the holes fill right back up. You want a natural fiber when you're using your wing needles, and you need a fairly close weave as well. I also wanted to talk to you a little bit, and this is new to me because, you know, I've been a Bernina person for so many years, but Janome has some special needles made for them by a company called Oregon. And I think those of you who sew with a Janome machine need to know about these needles. Now, because I'm not so familiar with it, I'm going to get my cheat sheet out here so I can tell you the right information here. So the blue tip needle is this one, and this is made in a size 11. And it has a slightly ball tip on it. It has an oversized eye, which accommodates embroidery thread well by reducing tension and stress on your needle thread. So it's highly recommended by Janome for their machines. And then I don't have a package of the purple tip needles because we sell through those very, very quickly. But the purple tip needle is an interesting one I found. It's made in a size 14, and it is designed with, and this will sound strange, but it has some little tiny, teeny tiny spines on each side of the needle, just above the eye. And those little tiny spines don't get put off by them because they're there for a good reason. Those little spines are designed to open up the fabric so the needle can go through, and the fabric then will not be inhibited. The needle thread will not be inhibited. It is especially good for embroidery when you have a very dense design because those little spines help open up as the needle goes through previous stitching. So a great needle for Janome users is that purple tip needle. And then the other needle that Oregon makes for Janome, or Janome contracts with Oregon to make, is a red tip, and it comes in a size 14, and it's a true sharp needle. So this is the very best sharp needle that you can use on your Janome machines. And they particularly recommend it for tricky threads like metallic and even monofilament thread. And again, if you're using that awful rayon thread, you probably better get this one too. All right. As I've mentioned in another one of the videos, Smets makes the needles for Bernina, and you will find Smets needles here in this store and other quality stores. I found this chart I found it first on the Smets site, and then I also saw it on a Bernina blog site, the We All Sew site. And I'm going to hold this so that Jessica's got it all zoomed in, and I'd like for you to take a screenshot of this, because the next time I do a video, there's going to be a test on this one. Did everybody get it? Good, okay. Got your screenshot. So what this is an interesting reference, and when I say we're going to do a test on it, I'm messing with you. Of course, we're not going to do that, but this is something Smets does with their needles, and it can be very helpful. So right here they have a band, and it will be in various colors depending on the type of needle that is in that package. So this one has a red band, and so this is an embroidery needle. And then the size of the needle is also coded by another band. And so the chart over here shows the size of the needle. When is that important to you? If you're like me, you've left a needle in your machine, you've gone to Colorado for a week, you come back, and you're ready to sew again, and you have no idea what needle you left in the machine. But if you take your needle out, you can find the color coding, match it to what's in your package of needle, and that way you'll know what needle you have. We used to do some really funny things to store our needles to keep them organized, but now you don't have to do that. And you really don't need this chart to do it. You just go by these two colors right here. Okay? Really close to sharing with you everything I know about needles, but I hope that the next video I do will be about sewing a straight stitch. And I enlarged this picture quite a bit, so it's kind of blurry, but I'm sure you have sewn a straight stitch that looks like this, a little bit wobbly. Do you see how the stitches wobble from side to side? I'd like to talk to you about that and what you can do to get the best straight stitch possible on your sewing machine. So that's what we'll do next time, okay? Thank you all. Oh, listen, comment if you will. Let us know what kind of Smets needle you have used and has worked well for you. What did that Smets needle do that improved your sewing life a lot? We would appreciate that, and I think the other viewers will too. Thanks.